You've said yourself from your experience working in a local council
Yeah.
and being in charge of vulnerable children and having to oversee all of that. There's an awful lot of that in this country, and there's an awful lot of problems in this country socially, which are not going to be fixed by handing out money to people.
Absolutely not. I mean, I have one family in my area that there were 7 children, all from the same parents, and the parents could not cope and look after these children. Not to the point that can't cope, i.e. shouting and screaming and everything. Severe neglect.
Yeah.
Children going to school without shoes properly, you know, that have got holes in them. They've got dirty underwear. They are not been washed. They've got lice in their hair. They're skinny. They've not been fed. All this kind of stuff. You have to take those children away after time and time again. That's £1 million a year.
And taking
for
them
one
away,
council.
and putting them somewhere is not always the answer either. Let's talk to Paul Mason, contributing editor, for the New Statesman. Paul, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Paul.
Hello.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I mean, yes, we have inequality in this country. Yes, we have people making way too much money, and yes, we have people not making enough money. But when we start to see actresses saying it could be another Peterloo on our hands, I mean, it's getting a little bit out of control, isn't it?
Well, it was only in 2011, of course, that we had riots all over Britain by some very marginalised and dispossessed people. Now, a lot of those people were also involved in crime, antisocial behaviour, etc.
Yeah.
But look, the argument that people on the left would have is that, you know, the kind of children that you were just describing earlier, who come to school in a terrible state, it's quite amazing how few of them come from rich families, isn't it? And that poverty does have something to do with parents' ability to cope, with the mental health of parents. You know, I stand in my local Tesco watching people hovering over at 5 p.m. waiting for the food to be put out that is, past its sell-by date.
Yeah.
And it's always young mums. And it's young mums taking a decision probably between putting the central heating on and buying the food.
It's quite often old people, actually, I see doing that as well.
Yeah, well, I live in a big city in London, and
so do I.
it tends to be that. Yeah, no, everywhere there are people under economic stress, and so while there are 4 million children living in poverty, 2/3 of those in this country have a working parent. So what we're dealing with is working poverty, but we're also dealing with economic stress, because if you are a professional, say you're a young teacher, you know, a lot of your salary is going on living accommodation. Very difficult to get on the property ladder. And where I agree with Maxine Peake is, you know, the job I do, travelling around, listening to people, I just hear very high levels of anger. Not always from poor people, often from, you know, people with professional jobs who just can't make ends meet and can't see a future for themselves. And, you know, the final thing is, we used to be told, you know, things will be like this forever, but better. That was before 2008. And after 2008, the people who run society, or the political class, the top journalists, all they can really say is things are going to be like this forever, but worse. And that is not an inspiring thing to be telling a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old leaving school. And so I can see the possibility of a level of social unrest developing, which either goes to the left or to the right, as it's doing in a place like Brazil, because people just don't see a hopeful future from the system, the economic system that surrounds them.
But a lot of the anger, I think, Paul, as well, stems from the polarisation that seems to have occurred in the past, say, 4 or 5 years. I mean, you've been in this game a long time, as I have. I've never seen a more riven society than the one that we have now, not just in terms of rich and poor, but in terms of left and right, in terms of Remain and Leave, in terms of Trump and Antifa. I mean, I was watching a video this morning on...
What is Antifa?
Sorry?
What is Antifa?
Antifa is what they call the people who...
sorry, in Britain we call that anti-fascism. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Antifa in America I'm talking about. You know, where you've got a guy shouting at a woman who was standing outside of an airport, I think, just about to get into a taxi, just being really disgusting and horrible and personal about her husband who was in the NYPD. I've just never seen so much kind of poison being exchanged from both sides politically. And I think that will lead more to unrest than even any kind of, you know, monetary problems.
Well, I think I see this tension in society wherever I go, in Europe, in America.
Yes, it's in Europe as well, yeah.
And even in a country like Germany that's got a good living standard. What people are worried about is change and insecurity. And what is true for people like me on the left, I do want more public spending. I do want big companies like Google and Facebook to be taxed so that our kids can go to university for free. But I will accept that alone doesn't solve the sources of the anger. People are feeling very culturally insecure. You know, if all you've got is your local identity, you know, your family, your dad did this, your granddad did this, your great-granddad's name is on the cenotaph, and somebody says, look, you know, it's like it can all be taken away by migration, which is the big fear-mongering of the right. I can understand why people start worrying about migration, but what we've got to do, I think not just the left, but liberal people like yourselves on talk radio have got to have the guts to stand up to people and say there is a better story than racism and xenophobia that solves this, and it is getting together, sorting out the problems as much as we can constructively, and learning to live alongside each other.
As long as you promise not to call me a liberal, I'll agree to do that, Paul.
Oh, sorry, but you know what I mean? It's not people are going to travel, whether they're migrants or not migrants. So if you see somebody walking down your street you've never seen before, whether they're a migrant or a visitor or a tourist, you've got to have strategies for getting along with them. And I wish more politicians would stand together, shoulder to shoulder, left and right and centre, and say, the levels of tension against outsiders are not doing anybody any good. No matter what your worries are, there's got to be a constructive way of dealing with this. Otherwise, we will end up down the route of where some European countries are, where it is just, where it is. And I've spoken to people after Brexit. My colleagues who worked in the media, people from the Indian subcontinent or black people, fairly well off on a decent job. Suddenly they say, hold on a minute, I don't feel very safe in my own society. Why is that? We've got to acknowledge that, this is a threat and a problem and come up with solutions to it. And I think what Maxine Peake's done in this comment about this amazing film, which is about an event most people don't know about, when there was nearly a revolution in Britain, I think we should try and learn from our own history, both the kind of good bits of it and the bad bits of it.
But we were talking earlier about how we seem to now be worrying about the wrong things in our society. We worry about things like man-sized tissues. We worry about whether a trans woman is actually a woman. When there are real issues going on out there, which people should be getting worked up about.
I'm not so bothered about man-sized tissues. I think the issue of trans is a strong debate on both sides, and it's come at us quite quickly. But look, I think that to people struggling to put the food on the table in the evening and wondering whether they can afford to switch their central heating on, that is the most important thing. And you know what? At the last election, when I was campaigning, as you know, I'm a Labour supporter. Yeah. I was worried that everybody on the doorstep would want to talk about Brexit, and they didn't actually. They always wanted to talk about when's the pothole outside my door going to be fixed? When can we have our maternity ward reopened? Yeah. Is A&E going to close in my local hospital? These are the bread and butter issues. And if Theresa May is right and austerity is over, what that means is you've got to spend like crazy on public services. Because your previous contributor, whose name I missed, I'm sorry, was right about how heartbreaking it is to see children come to school in a terrible state because of either neglect or poverty or both. But I remember the 60s. I don't know how old you are. I'm 58, so I was brought
exactly the same age, Paul.
Yeah. Well, do you agree then that for most people, there was a decent enough living standard to make it unacceptable for the neglect and the dirt and the unwashed?
It's unacceptable now, Paul. It's absolutely unacceptable now.
No, but what I mean is that too many people now find it. It's not acceptable. We're accepting it as a fact of life. There would have been social workers intervening proactively before any of this.
But I don't think, Paul, we didn't have that level of poverty in a way, and I think part of the reason, exactly. Part of the thing that we have to think about is that we've now had decades since the 60s of a welfare state system which has completely failed the people. It's failed everybody. It hasn't helped really very many people to get back into work once they've been out of work. It hasn't worked as a safety net. It's worked as a means of sort of production for keeping people.
So what is your agenda? To abolish the welfare state and let everybody just survive?
I have no agenda, Paul.
Come on, I can hear the mere fact that you're talking about Donald Trump and Antifa, a word that nobody uses, tells me that
people use Antifa all the time.
I'm sorry, I've never heard it before.
Well, I'm sorry you haven't heard of it, Paul. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No, because I have actually been on demonstrations against fascists before I was a journalist for the BBC. Good, and we all need to get out on them and fight this pernicious lying.
But why would you pretend that the word doesn't exist, though?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying the fact is that you're using a Trumpian vocabulary.
Oh, I see. So you don't like the word because you think it's Trumpian.
No, I think. Yeah, I think it is. I'll tell you what. I think.
And you know what, Paul? This is proving the exact point. We are worrying about the wrong stuff. Let's go back.
You care more about the fact
word.
that I've used a word that you don't want to be used,
no, I'm just saying,
right? And pretending that it doesn't exist. And instead, I'm trying to say to you, Paul. Excuse me, I'm trying to say to you that the welfare state has failed and we need to rethink how it works. You're not even willing to consider that.
No, I'm telling you, it hasn't failed. It's not funded well enough. And
you want to throw more money at it?
Well, hold on a minute. Yes, I do. Absolutely. If you want to stop people coming to school in a terrible state or having parents needing to have intervention to basically get their kids away from them, which is an extreme thing that happens, but it does happen, then what we need to do is abolish poverty. And to abolish poverty needs redistribution of wealth. And the wealth that sits at the top of society, these hundreds of houses that we have here in London, unoccupied, owned by foreign speculators, never lived in. That's the disgrace that I want to
But that's tip of the iceberg. That's a tiny amount of money compared to what would be needed. And you are joining forces with people like Ian Duncan-Smith. You might not think so, but he too is calling for more money to be put into the welfare state to make sure that universal credit actually works. I want to ask a question about the fact that people.
Work, though, does it?
Well, he wants to make sure it does, and actually, he's probably one of the people that have been at the forefront with the Centre for Social Justice in the Conservative Party. Has been at the forefront of fighting poverty, and I won't hear otherwise because I've seen it with my own eyes, Paul. So I've got a question for you about divisive politics.
Paul, you've worked in broadcasting a long time.
I've got a question for you, Paul, about divisive politics. I want to know if those people at home that think that things will change now as a result of voting a certain way and making their voice heard, how important is it? I mean, it's a silly question in a way, but I feel this is really important to deliver what they want and what they ask for.
Are you talking about Brexit?
Yes, I'm talking about Brexit, but I'm also talking about elections and just generally the fact that they're not heard. They feel that they don't have a voice in politics. No one really represents them, even though there's a large amount of people in Westminster from both political parties who do their best on a daily basis to do just that. Are we not going to go further towards kind of, divisive society. If we don't deliver on what we've said, are we not just feeding them, almost empty promises?
Well, I think the political parties have to deliver on what they promise. Okay, that's the number one thing. I don't think the Conservatives promised very much in the last election. But on Brexit, I think we do have to try to deliver the outcome that referendum demanded. It was a narrow victory, and if it was a strike vote at 52-48, you probably wouldn't go on strike. But it was a victory, and fine. Let's try and deliver it, but let's try and mitigate the damage that it will do to the economy, because it will do damage to the economy. And let's try and heal the scars. There has been an upsurge of hate crime and hate speech driven by Brexit against foreigners and against migrants. So let's try and overcome that. But yeah, let's deliver Brexit. I'm in favour of delivering the softest possible Brexit that keeps our country very close to Europe, that keeps us in the single market. That's Brexit.
But that's not necessarily what people voted for, though, is it? That's not what the referendum was all about.
With your right-wing agenda, because
I don't have an agenda, Paul. How is it possible for me to have a right-wing agenda just because I disagree with you?
No, because
do you have a left-wing agenda, Paul? Do you have a left-wing agenda?
I certainly do. I'm a socialist. Yeah.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, I'm a socialist, and I'm a.
Well, most people in this country are not socialists, Paul. Most people in this country are not extremists. Okay.
Let's do a survey.
We do a survey every time there's an election. There's never been a socialist government in this country in the history of the country.
Do a survey of who wants to nationalise the railways. Do a survey.
I want to nationalise the railways. That's for a start.
What's the local bus company controlled by the state and not by private companies?
Well, I would say I would be one of those people. That doesn't make me a socialist.
You're a socialist, then, aren't you?
No, I'm not. Not at all. Yeah, I don't put myself in any particular
camp. But now
camp.
we are again arguing about words rather than things that matter to people and changes to their lives. I do find that there's certain people in politics that get obsessed with labels.
Yeah.
Don't label me. I might like opera and come from a working class family. Don't label people. I think that all of a sudden we're obsessed with saying whether socialists, whether we're capitalists, whether this, that, and the other. You can have points of view that cross political spectrums.
According to Paul, I can't have a right wing agenda and want to nationalise the railway. So which one of those two things am I? You can't actually put me in a box, Paul. I can have different views on different issues. That's what I do.
That's good. But we were talking about welfare, and it's. I want to expand the welfare state. I want to expand spending on the things that make human-to-human services easier, so that that we're not just talking about, going to accident and emergency if you get knocked over by a bus. But we're talking about being able to go and get mental health issues treated on the state in a timely way instead of, say, two years, which some teenagers have been finding when they've been suicidal. You see, we live in a rich society. We're the fourth or fifth richest society in the world. If you go to a country like South Korea, you see what modern means. You see a country that's able to build big railways, big road bridges, big motorways, open car factories. Everybody goes to university who wants to, almost for free. We've forgotten what modern feels like.
But South Korea is a pretty capitalist economy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is, but it's run in a way where the state takes a much more active role in trying to shape the economy. And guess what? As a result, it's the world leader in most of the modern technologies. They build cars. They build semiconductors. We sold our last semiconductor company a couple of years ago. The South Koreans are world leaders of it. And when they look at us, all right, Brexit was a thing. It happened. We have to make it happen. But a lot of economists I speak to and a lot of people in Asia, they're saying, well, we're getting on with building the 21st century. Well, you're obsessing about your own past. And I think there's an element of validity in that.
There may be, but there's also an element of validity in the fact that it's a lot cheaper to produce stuff over there than it is here. But Paul, listen, thank you very much for coming on. We've got a knock it on the head, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. Love to have you back on, though. Paul Mason there with the left-wing agenda. He's a socialist. I'm not. This is Talk Radio.